Good morning, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. And as Stephanie was saying, supported decision making is one of the things that I focus on, and it's one of the things that is actually an extra. We don't really we operate on grant money where I work, and so this is like an extra thing that we just know is important, and it's something that I'm very passionate about because I am a family member and because it's been really important in my son's life as well. All right, so this is my son Ben. In all these pictures, he's featured in one way or another. So where we start really is that we believe that every person can make choices and has a right to make decisions. Now, how they make choices is going to vary from person to person to person. All of us do things differently, right? And so if you've seen one person with a disability, you've seen one person with a disability. And so we have to be able to be flexible and figure out what does that person need to be able to make those choices, to be able to make decisions. And as Stephanie was saying, some of the things that we're going to talk about today are going to challenge you a little bit. And so I'm going to challenge your thinking a little bit. And I want you to rethink human decision making. Think about the way we make decisions. We all make decisions based on things that are unique to us, how we were raised, our family culture, our values, our personal values. And what works for one person may not necessarily work for the next person. So there's no scientific way, there's no really practical way to measure whether this decision is good or not good. I may decide one thing and it may work perfectly for me, and Stephanie may decide something and the same thing. She may make the same decision and it's a total disaster for her. So what works for one person may not work for the next person. So when we think about human decision making, realize that it's flawed, right? The way we think about it is flawed, and there's not a perfect way to say, yes, this is a good decision for this person, or no, this is not going to be a good decision. Excuse me. I also want you to rethink the word capacity. You hear the word capacity a lot when we talk about people making choices and decisions and when you get into the legal arena. And it's important, but it's also not all or nothing. Excuse me. So any of us, whether we have a disability or not, may have the capacity to make some of our decisions at any given point in time, but other decisions we may struggle with and we may need to ask for help with. We may need other people's advice and other people's input. And so we have to realize that, as we go through life, our situation changes. And so we may be more capable at one point in our lives than another. If we get help, understanding what our choices are, what our options are, what the repercussions of our decision might be, then most of us can make decisions and choices for ourselves. So I want to explore what we call adult decision making, right? Because that's the arena that you're entering into, right? You're leaving that pediatric safe haven of life where your parents are making all your decisions for you. And as parents, it's a transition for your child, but it's also a transition for you. As the parent of a young adult, I can tell you there's many times that I have to stop and say, my son's an adult, treat him like an adult, right? He may still live in our home, but he's an adult living in our home. And so you have to adjust the way you think and the way you operate as a parent. Even if your child has a disability and needs your help with a lot of things, they still are becoming an adult. And I know Tammy's going to talk about this a little bit later, but I wanted to just touch on a couple of things. I really like to think about decision making as a continuum, right? And we start over here on the left with any of us can make our own decisions, right? And so the person can make their own decisions without any help or any advice from anybody else, right? And that's pretty rare, honestly, because most of us need help and advice at some point in our lives, right? We ask people for help. And then we talk about supported decision making, and I'm really going to dig into this in a minute, but supported decision making just means that you're making your own decisions with help from other people. And then you have some other things like powers of attorney. And I know Stephanie's going to talk about the durable power of attorney, but I wanted to highlight the general power of attorney. That's something that we use with my son, Ben. In those cases where there's a legal issue or a legal decision that needs to be made that people may not deem him to be capable. And I'm going to give you the example in just a minute. We can take it beyond that more informal supported decision making, and use that power of attorney. And the general power of attorney is cool because you don't have to wait until the person becomes incapacitated. If Ben just doesn't want to make decisions about things like his services and different things that he doesn't really care about, then we can make those decisions for him at any point in time. So it's something that the person actually gives, right? So Ben gives his dad and I, whoops, I'm sorry, there's a microphone there. Ben has given his dad and I the capacity to make decisions on his behalf. This came into play, as I said, he's 33, so we've been doing the supported decision-making thing for what, about 15 years, since he turned 18. This was the first time we really had to think about how's this going to work. In February, he became suddenly very ill, violently ill. You know, he was having all kinds of stomach issues, and this just like he woke up one morning and was just, like I said, violently ill. And by the end of the day, I had taken him to the doctor. They sent us to the emergency room. We were admitted to the hospital, and a couple days later, he was about to have surgery to have his gallbladder taken out. And nobody in the hospital questioned anything at any point until we got to the point where they were getting ready to wheel him into the operating room. And they're like, do you guys have power of attorney? And it's like, actually we do. And I had to happen to have it with me because that's something I wouldn't go to the hospital without. And so we were able to then sign for him to go into the operating room and have that surgery, without having to go back and forth about whether he had the capacity to sign or not. So that was something that we did early on that is just kind of there if we need it. So the general power of attorney can be a very useful tool. As I said, I'm not going to talk about the durable power of attorney. The conservatorship really just means somebody has the care and custody of the person's estate or their money, their assets. And then finally, guardianship, which both of us are going to talk about, I think, a little bit, means that the court appoints someone to have the care and custody of the person. And we'll get into that in just a minute. So I want to just go over a couple of things because there's a lot of myths, I think, around guardianship. I think, as Ben was getting close to guardianship or to the age of majority where he was going to be turning 18, we had a lot of people telling us, parents and other people saying, when he turns 18, you better get guardianship. It's just something you do when you have a kid with a disability. That's not necessarily true. So the first myth is really that any adult with IDD or intellectual and developmental disabilities should have or needs a guardian. And that's false. Guardianship should never be determined solely on the basis of a disability or a diagnosis. It should always be carefully thought through, and I'm going to give you some tools later to really help you decide and help you explore what kind of decision-making supports might be needed for any given person. Parents who are legal guardians of their son or daughter are always the final decision maker. Again, this is false. When your child has a guardian, they become a ward of the court or a ward of the state. And that means that the judge is like the parent. And the judge then appoints someone to have care and custody. And I like to use the analogy of when your children are small and you're going to be away for a little while, whether it's going out to eat or you're away for the weekend or whatever, you find someone to take care of your child in your absence. They have the care and custody of your child while you're out and while you can't provide that care. It's the same thing. The judge gives the care and custody to the guardian, but the judge retains and the court retains final decision-making power about several different aspects of that person's life. And so the guardian doesn't have full decision-making power for that person. The next myth is that a guardian can make the ward do whatever they want. This is false. And I'm going to give you an example. I've had people call me and say, my son or my daughter has mental health issues, and they just refuse to take their medication sometimes, and I need guardianship so that I can make them take their medication. Now think about it. Is a piece of paper from the court going to give you any more power to talk your son or daughter into taking that medication? Probably not. And really, it doesn't give you the power to forcefully put the pills in their mouth and force them down their throat. That's considered assault in most places, right? And so you can't force that person. And so you have to really think about, does the guardianship solve the issue? Another example is, well, my child wanders. They like to leave the house, and I'm afraid they're going to get lost. Again, piece of paper is not the thing that's going to keep them from leaving the house. And so you have to think about, does guardianship address the need or the issue? Another myth is that if someone has a guardian, they cannot participate in supported decision making. This is the coolest thing about supported decision making, is that anybody can participate in supported decision making. So if you have a guardian, your guardian should still be helping you to learn to make decisions, to learn to make choices. And even if you can't ever not have that guardian and make your own legal decisions, they should be encouraging you to participate in every decision made about your life. And whenever possible, they should be respecting those decisions. So if you make a decision that you want to live in a certain apartment and they want you to live in a different apartment, unless there's a good reason, they should respect what you want. So unless that decision is going to cause harm to the person or to someone else, that guardian should be helping that person and respecting that person's decision-making abilities and rights, and helping them learn to make decisions, as we all do from the time our kids are little, right? And then finally, legal guardianship only impacts a person's finances and services. That is untrue, and I'm going to show you in a little bit all the things that guardianship really can touch. So I want you to think for yourself for a minute, and you can actually shout things out if you want to. What are choices and decisions that you make for yourself every day that you wouldn't want somebody else making for you? And I'll start us out. I like to decide how to spend my money because I like to shop. So how you spend your money can be one of those choices. What's something else that you decide for yourself every day? What you eat. And what you wear. What else? Medical care. Who you go to, whether you refuse medical care or accept medical care. Absolutely.
How to exercise.
Exercise, yeah, whether you want to or not, right? What else?
Spend your time.
How you spend your time. And maybe even who you spend it with, right? What else? Friendships, right? Who your friends are. Maybe even who you date or who you want to marry. Or if you want to get married. What else? Where you live, yeah. These are all great examples. There are things that we make decisions without even thinking about it throughout every part of our day. And we don't want anybody else making those decisions for us. But if you have a guardian, it can impact all aspects of your life. And as Stephanie said, you're going to learn more about the life course later in the day, but you're going to see pieces of the life course throughout this presentation. And what these icons represent are the different aspects of our life. And so we have daily living, what you do, whether you work, whether you're going to school, what you do during the day, what your routines are. You have the brown house, and that's community living, which is where you live, where you go, who you live with, if you drive. Safety and security is down here in the bottom in the red. Those are your legal rights, your personal safety, what you do in an emergency. Advocacy and engagement is things like voting, your rights, advocating for your rights, who provides your personal care. That's a big deal, deciding who decides your personal care, right? If you need somebody to help bathe you or get you dressed, I want to decide who's going to be doing that, right? Because that's very personal. Social and spirituality, who I date, who I marry, whether I have a faith life, whether I want to go to church or to temple or anything like that, and where I want to go, who I associate with. And then finally, the blue up there is healthy living. So not just medical care, but also, what I eat and drink, whether I consent to or object to medical care. And so when you have a guardian, it can touch all of these different aspects of life. Some of the reasons that people seek guardianship, and there's many, but the ones that I think that are probably the most pertinent to the crowd here today is that you have a child that's with a developmental disability or some kind of a special health care need or diagnosis that's getting ready to turn 18, and you're worried about how are they going to get their medical care taken care of? How am I going to still be involved in things like the IEP meetings at school? All those different kind of things that come into play when your child's turning 18. Also, young adults aging out of foster care. There's kind of a pipeline of foster care, especially if you have a disability, foster care right into guardianship. Oftentimes it's because people are worried about a family member. Maybe it's someone who's aging, someone who's had an accident or an illness, or a mental health issue, and they're worried about them and their health and their well-being. Oftentimes it's because somebody recommends it. Might be a teacher, a medical professional, someone you see in the service provider world, any other professional that may say that, hey, you need to go get a guardianship. And sometimes they're not wrong, but sometimes they don't know all the facts and they don't really know about things like supported decision making and all of the alternatives to guardianship. And so just because a medical professional or some other professional says, hey, this is something you do, they may not have all the information. And they know your child through their whatever avenue, whether it's medical care, the school, or whatever, but you have the whole picture. So that's really important to think about. It's a perception sometimes that it's what everybody does, kind of like what I was saying earlier. And then oftentimes it's because you're worried about that person is going to be taken advantage of or exploited. They're at risk of those things. And so that's why people oftentimes seek guardianship. And these are all legitimate concerns, but guardianship may not be the only way to address them. So before you make a decision about guardianship, and I'm going to quit talking about it and really talk about supported decision making, you really want to think about, does guardianship address the thing that I'm worried about, the issues that I'm concerned about, in the least restrictive way? It's kind of like when you're in school. You want your child in the least restrictive environment, right? You want them to get their education in as inclusive of a way as possible. You also want them to be able to live their adult life in the most inclusive way possible. So thinking about that least restrictive way to help them to make their decisions and to address the concerns that you have. I think it's also important not to confuse intense needs with the need for guardianship. And I'll give you an example. So I had a friend who, he's since passed away, he was older, but person who used a wheelchair. He was not able to move most parts of his body independently. He was unable to feed himself. He was unable to get dressed. He was unable to take a bath, get out of bed in the morning. He needed help with every single aspect of daily living that you could think of, with one exception, making his own choices and decisions. Gary was one of the smartest people I've ever met. But people judged him by the fact that he had all these needs and all of these requirements for help with his daily living needs, which had nothing to do with the fact that he could think and he could make choices and he could make good decisions. He couldn't communicate them without some help, but he could make those decisions. And so really think about, is it the care need that you're looking at here, or is it the person's decision-making abilities and capacities? I think it's also important to slow down and think about all these things, because guardianship has a long and wide impact on people. And so I just showed you all the different parts of life it can touch, but it's also very difficult to reverse. Once you have a guardian, if you want to get rid of it, you have to go back to the court and prove to the court that, hey, I can now do all the things that you said I couldn't do. And so you have to have doctors that sign off on that. It's a process. It can be done. I've seen it happen. But it's a longer process than getting the guardianship in the first place, which is kind of a backwards way of thinking, really. But so it's really important to think about that because of the difficulty of restoration of rights. Also because of the impact on all the different life outcomes that you might want. And then, potentially limiting the things that you can do, the life experiences that you can have, which is the way that we learn and grow, by having experiences and doing things and experiencing life. And so let's dig into what supported decision making really means. What it means is that people make their own decisions with support from people that they choose and that they trust and that they know. And so I get to decide who helps me make decisions. Right? So I should then, and that's how all of us do. We all decide who gives us our help and who we ask for advice when we need it. So digging into some of the specifics, sometimes people just need help understanding the issue that's at hand, the choices that they have, what are their options, what happens if I do this, what happens if I don't, and really having somebody to talk that through with to help them understand. Sometimes they need information that's more accessible, right? If a doctor hands you a sheet of paper that has a bunch of writing on it and you don't read and write very well, Maybe you need pictures. Maybe you need a video. Maybe you need it in Braille. Maybe you need that information in some other accessible format. And so that's important to really think about, is what kind of information will help you understand and be able to make those choices. You might need somebody to help you dig in and do some research, right? As parents, we've all done it. Back in the day, making me sound old here, which I am. When my son was little, 33 years ago, we didn't have the internet. Crazy to think about that we didn't have the internet, right? But I had to go to the library, and I had to order books, and I had to get magazines and read articles, and I did all the research I could to find out about cerebral palsy, and then when he was diagnosed with epilepsy, and then when he was diagnosed with osteoporosis, and then when he had scoliosis and needed to have surgery. Every single time I had to do some research. And, I wasn't born knowing how to do research, but I figured it out. But sometimes people need help with that and help figuring out how to find out more about the thing that they're making a decision or choice around. Sometimes it's just sitting and brainstorming with people, throwing out ideas, right? I don't know what to do. Well, let's just throw out ideas. Sometimes the craziest idea is the best idea, right? And that's hard for some people to realize. But, explaining the options and brainstorming with them what the options are. Maybe they need to take a class to learn more about their health or about self-advocacy, and so helping them identify what's a need that I have to learn more, to build my skills. And then advice. Maybe helping me think about what are the pros and cons, what's the good, what's the bad, what if I do this, what if I don't. And so having somebody to talk through that with, like we all do. Advising about a choice. If it were me, I would do this, right? And so just getting someone's advice and asking them, if you were in my shoes, what would you do? And then reminding them about some of their long-term visions. Does this fit into your long-term vision? How's that going to take your trajectory towards what you want or towards what you don't want? And really helping them think through that. Sometimes, as I was talking about, like with Gary, they need help with communicating their preference and choices. Again, Gary had very unintelligible speech for most people to understand. There were a few people that could understand him, and he could tell them what he was trying to say. They would repeat it back to him, and then he would tell them, yeah, you're right, or no, you're not. And sometimes that was a back and forth process, but they figured out how to do it. They figured out how to communicate. And so, whether we're talking to doctors or our support coordinators or other professionals, sometimes we just need help with communicating. I know sometimes, when you get into a doctor's office or into a hospital, you just kind of get that white coat syndrome, and you just can't think of what you were going to say. You just can't remember what you were going to ask, or you just don't feel comfortable talking. And I think that happens a lot of times to people with disabilities. It can be very intimidating. And so having somebody really help them talk through things and maybe make a list. I'm a questions asker. When I go to the doctor, and when Ben was getting ready, for instance, to have his scoliosis surgery, this was something we prepared for and went back and forth with the doctor for about a year to make sure that we got everything right and that it was the right timing and all the different things. And I every time would go in with my list of questions, and it even got to the point where the doctor would be like, okay, pull out your questions, because he knew I was going to come with them, right? And so helping a person with a disability or a diagnosis to really make that list of the questions. I know I went to the doctor it was a couple of weeks ago for an issue, and I knew there were certain things I was going to ask, and I didn't make my list. And when I left that doctor's office, I was driving home, and I'm like, dadgummit, I didn't ask about this, this, and this. It went right out of my brain when I went into that room and that doctor came in the room, because we were focused on that one particular thing, and I forgot about all the other things that were connected to it that I was going to talk about. So having that list of questions sometimes is key. Help with communicating, whether it's helping me program a device that I use to communicate with, or being a person that just says, hey, we've been talking and this is what Jane decided she wants to do, right? And I'm going to, yep, that's it. Making sure that others understand and recognize and respect that person's choices. Those are all ways that people can help with communication. Logistics and reminders, right? Forgetting about appointments, or scheduling the next appointment, or making sure that I get my refills on my prescriptions, all of those kind of things that we can help people get organized around and remember to do. Even maybe going to appointments with the person and helping them take notes. And I know it's really hard sometimes to talk to a doctor and then remember what they said when you walk out of the room, for any of us. So sometimes it helps to have somebody remember with you and maybe write notes while they're talking to you. Even maybe arranging transportation for the person to get there. I'm going to get a quick drink here. So just as an example, thinking through a medical procedure. Up here at the top, it's like, do I really need this procedure, this test or procedure? What are the downsides, right? Are there side effects I should think about? Are there simpler, safer options? What are my other choices? What happens if I do nothing or decide not to do this? And how much does it cost? These are all questions that a supporter can help someone think through and ask questions about. So when you think about it, how do you make decisions? What do you do if you're not familiar with something? A couple of examples. Ben's twin, Matt, who does not have a disability, when he lived at home, he was finishing physical therapy school and he was working, and I did his taxes for him for several years. And then when he moved out and he moved in with his girlfriend, who he later married, he's like, I'm gonna do my own taxes. I'm like, cool, go for it. And guess who he called when he got stuck? Mom. He called and asked, what did you do? Or what do I do when I get to this part? He wanted my advice. He needed my help. Medical care, we ask other people, what would you do in this situation? When my dad was alive, if something happened to my car, even if it was making a noise, I could call and say, Dad, it's going ping, ping, ping. What does that mean? And half the time he could tell me either what it meant or where to go and what to do about it. We all ask other people for help and advice when we're not familiar or when something's new to us. So it's the same thing we all do. And it's really what supported decision making is. It's getting help when it's needed, just like any of us would do. Some of the benefits. You can retain your legal rights. When you have guardianship, you lose some or all of your legal rights. And so having a supported decision making person or agreement, and I should probably back up and say, when you're doing supported decision making, you can look at it two different ways. I call it the capital S and the small s. Capital S means I have an agreement, right? I sign an agreement saying that this person's going to help me do this and this person's going to help me do this. They sign it, they know what they're doing, they agree to it. It can be a legally binding piece of paper, and I think Tammy will talk about that a little bit later, what Children's Mercy uses. But I can also do it in a very informal, casual way. I can pick people that I want to help me in my life, and I don't have to have an agreement with them. They're just my people. They're my circle of support, and they're who I go to when I need help. So you can look at it either way, and neither one is wrong. It's one of those things where there's a continuum of choices in how you do this. It also increases a person's self-determination. And self-determination really just means that I have agency or I have some control in my own life. And so that person knows that they have some control over their life when they're able to make their decisions with support. It allows them for personal growth and to have more life experiences and to try different things. It reduces that stigma. There's a little bit of a stigma around having a guardian. It's like, oh, I'm viewed as less capable possibly because I have a guardian. And so those are some of the benefits of using supported decision-making type of supports and other alternatives as well. The dignity of risk, I just have to touch on this really briefly. It really just means that any of us have the right to take risks because we try new things or we do something different or something we've never tried before. And it should be the same for people that have a disability or a diagnosis. But sometimes we hold them to a higher standard. It's like, oh, you messed up, you're not gonna be able to do that again, right? I've had people call and say, I was on the internet and I was talking to a boy and I was talking about maybe meeting up, which again is something that maybe they shouldn't be doing. My mom found out and now I can never use the internet again. That's kind of extreme, right? People should have consequences, but they shouldn't have to pay for something for the rest of their life if they make a mistake. We all do things that we probably are not proud of. We all do things like overdrawing our bank account, right? We mess up and we fix it and we go on. And that's just how life is. And that's the dignity of risk that everybody should have, is being able to try new things and fail at them sometimes and figure out, hey, there's a consequence to what I decided to do, and I'm either not going to do that again or I'm going to do it differently so that it's not something that gets me into hot water. We have to find that balance. We want people to be healthy and safe, but we also want them to have that dignity of risk, and we want them to be self-determined and be able to have some agency and choice in their own lives. And how do we find that balance? So how will you know? How do you know what kind of support a person needs? Again, we're looking at those circles, those icons again, those daily parts of our lives, from daily life and where we live and our health and being safe and friends and family and what we do in our leisure time, advocacy, all those different things. And so we think about all those things as we're determining what kind of support does a person need. And so we have a tool for that. This is our exploring decision-making options tool. And it's really big up there, but I still don't know if you can probably read it or not, and I apologize for that. But I will make sure, if I haven't, I think I sent this to you guys. Will it be on the site, the handouts? Is there like a site they can go to? Or? Okay. If not, my email is at the end of the presentation. You can email me, and I will email this to you, and I will help you figure out how to use it. And so we look at each of those different parts of life. And so like on daily life and employment, do I decide if and where I want to work? If I can say yes, I can decide that without any help, I'm in kind of the blue space right there. That means I can do it. I put a mark right there. If I can't do that without support, and I need people to help me. I know I'm going to need some kind of help. I'm going to go to that purple, and I'm going to put a mark there, and I'm going to come back to that. And then finally, if it's like, I don't think that's something I'm going to be able to do. I know somebody's going to need to do that for me, or I want them to do that for me. Then I go to the green, and I put a mark there. And then we figure out what kind of help they need, and whether it's guardianship or whether it's a power of attorney or something else where somebody can do a thing for that person or make a decision for that person. And so you go through this entire tool, and it should be done in, I think, a group, right? The person, first of all, that you're thinking about, the focused person who's going to be turning 18, and you're thinking about, do they need guardianship or not? They should be involved in these discussions. These are conversations. It's not about filling out a tool. You don't even have to put a mark on this thing if you don't want, but have the conversation, have the discussion. Pull in other people that know that person. I know my son Ben very well from living at home with him, from going out in the community and doing things with him. But I don't know him in other aspects of his life. When he was in school, there were people at the school that knew things about him that I didn't know because they saw him on a different level than I did. He volunteers at our local fire station. The firemen that are his friends and that he works with know him in a completely different way than I do. So bringing them into the picture. So bring the people into the picture that know and care about that person and can help have that discussion and really make it a rich, thoughtful process to determine what kind of supports, if any, is that person going to need. This is an example of what Ben's looks like. So you see that he has some things in the blue. There's some things he can decide. It's like, I want to do this, I want to do that, what I like, what I don't like. And then there's some things, a lot of things in the purple that we had to figure out, okay, what are the things that we can do to support him? And then we have a few things in the green where it's either like, like when he has seizures, we know that there's a period of time after he has a grand mal seizure where he goes into a state where he can't make decisions for himself because he's really just out of it. He's either sleeping or just cannot cognitively connect with anything. And so we know under certain circumstances medically, he's going to need a decision maker for him. We know now that in things like surgery, having that power of attorney so that we can make decisions for him on his behalf is very, very important. So these are just some examples. I took actually pieces of that tool I just showed you. So daily life and employment. I wanted you to see a lot of it's technology. Technology is one of our best friends. I mean, everybody uses it, and there's so many new innovations all the time that you can use all sorts of things. And so, finding and looking for a job, I've listed some things there, and some things that connect you to your supported decision-making people that they can help you with, like reading or filling out applications or practicing interview skills or talking about your different options. What do you like about this job? Well, what do you like about this job? Which one's a good fit for you? Money stuff is a big concern for people, right? Somebody's going to take advantage of them and get all their money or get their benefits, and that's a big problem, right? And so we think about the things that we can do. Online banking. I live and breathe by all these things myself, actually, too, in addition to helping Ben do them. Having an online banking account. Having a joint bank account. When Ben and his twin turned 16, I got them joint bank accounts, both of them, and to teach them how to use money and how to be smart about banking and not overdrawing your accounts and things like that. So Matt eventually was able to go on and take over and do his own thing when he was old enough, right? For Ben, he still needs that help. He still needs me to check on that and make sure he's got money in his account, that he's not overdrawing, all those different kinds of things. There's also things like limited bank accounts. So you can have a limit on the amount of spending. So if that person goes and their friend's trying to talk them into buying something really expensive, at the store, a new game console or something, and that's really not something they should be buying for them, if you have a limit on that account, it's like having a credit card and being denied your credit card. It'll just say, nope, you can't make that purchase. And so that's the way that if the person is more impulsive or may do things like that, or you're really worried about that, you can set those limits on there so that they can't overdraw their account or spend a ton of money all at once. You can do it by the day, you can do it by the week, you can do it by interaction. There's many different options. It's free. Most banks are familiar with it. It's easy to do. The other thing that I live and breathe by, automatic bill pay and automatic deposit. I would forget to pay so many bills if it wasn't for automatic bill pay. Why don't we use that for people with disabilities? It's a no-brainer. We can all do these things. And so these are just some of the ideas under this one. And I'm not going to go through all the ones on healthy living, but there's some other things on health as well. So keeping a person healthy and safe, taking their medication, right? Even though Ben still lives at home and we can help him with his medication, we want him to start being independent and taking his own medication. So having like a medication dispenser or a pill dispenser. And it can be from a very expensive one to one that's, you buy at the dollar store. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. But start doing things now that will help your child later on and that they can learn some of these skills around their own health. So it really comes back to this, that every person can make choices and has a right to make decisions. Even if they have a guardian, they still have a right to help make those choices and decisions as best they can. There's no one size fits all. It looks different for every person. You really have to dig in and figure out, what does this person need? What kind of help do they need? Who do they want to help them? And how do they want to be helped to do different things? It's a process, or it's a paradigm, it is a process, really. It's not a program, though. Asking, what will it take? That was something I learned early on as just being an advocate. Always ask, if you get told no, well, what would it take? What would it take? And if you keep asking that question of enough people, they'll give you an answer eventually that you'll like. Trust me, I've done it many times. And working with the person, it should be in partnership and not just deciding for them, but deciding with them what's going to work and how they want it to work in their life. It's simply something the rest of us take for granted. It's what we do all the time. If you take away that disability lens, it's really just about living life. So I'm going to just really quickly thumb through this. I know because Tammy has a lot to tell you as well. There's some resources on here. You guys can get copies of this. You can get a PDF of the whole presentation. These are supported decision-making agreements that are on our website. There are two different ones. One has open-ended questions and one has just check boxes you can fill out. And then this is our website, and we have a supported decision-making page. Visit that. All the things I've talked about are there. The tools I've talked about are there. There's more even than I talked about today. So visit that, explore that. These are some things that our DD Council has that you can get for free. There's like 11 different booklets around supported decision-making that you can get. They're all free. You can download them. If you're not able to download and print them, contact the council, and they will send them to you. And then we'll leave the questions for later, and I'm going to get out of Tammy's way so that she can go.
Good morning. Got some technical assistance coming here. There we go. Thank you. Again, thank you, Jane. Thank you all for being here. I'm very excited to see so many people. As a social worker at Children's Mercy, we deal with these issues every day, trying to help families navigate through these difficult waters. And so hopefully we can make a little sense of things today. So just wanted to start off, and I have to credit parts of this presentation with my mentor, Terry Hickam, who did this prior to me being assigned. An example of under guardianship, the ward wants to buy his own house and live here with his friends, but the guardian says, sorry, I don't think that's what's best for you. I'm your guardian. This is just what we're going to do. Whereas on the other side, we have them actually having a conversation about it and seeing how can we make this work. So as Jane said, there's lots of options and lots of choices, and we don't have to stick to the hard and fast rules. Supported decision making under the Missouri law says that before appointing a guardian or conservator, the court is required to consider less restrictive alternatives, including a supported decision-making agreement. So this went into effect in 2018 and is now becoming more and more popular. And so we are seeing it here more often and have gotten more familiar with it and are working to help families more in making those decisions. Again, as Jane said, there's lots of opportunities, there's lots of different ways that it can go, lots of options, be it the full guardianship, the limited guardianship, conservatorship, or just the durable power of attorney. And they all kind of can fit together some ways, and some ways can be totally separate. Guardianship itself, the definition is the legal process of being appointed by a probate court to have the authority and responsibility for the personal affairs of another person who has been evaluated as incapacitated. Whereas conservatorship is legally appointed by a court to manage an incapacitated person or minor's financial and personal affairs, but they have no authority to make decisions regarding another person's affairs. So a lot of times it can be the guardian and conservator can be the same person. Generally in areas where there is, say, a large inheritance or a large insurance payment or benefit, then there might be a separate guardian. So, but you have to go through court in order to get each of these. So some facts, again, often the guardianship and conservatorship are combined, but as Jane said, the guardian remains a ward of the court, and the guardian is granted custody. Whereas with conservatorship, the person is judged as quote-unquote disabled. The person with a disability is defined as a person who is unable to make any physical or unable due to a physical or mental condition to receive and evaluate information, or who lacks the ability to communicate decisions needed to manage his financial resources. As Jane pointed out, there's lots of ways of communication these days. And with technology, we're getting better and better at providing people ways to communicate their desires and wishes. So we want to take all of those into consideration and not just jump to appointing a conservator. Missouri uses the term incapacitated, meaning a person who is unable due to any physical or mental condition to receive and evaluate information or to communicate decisions to the extent that he is unable to provide himself with clothes, food, shelter, safety, or other care to such an extent that the physical injury, illness, or disease is likely to occur. So, again, incapacitated is the basis on which definitions are made. Incapacitated and incompetent are not the same. We have to break it down a little bit further. Our policy definition of capacity at Children's Mercy is an adult or minor authorized to consent to his or her own treatment or treatment for his or her child must have capacity. Capacity is the ability to make informed decisions. A person with capacity is conscious, able to understand the nature, severity, risks, and alternatives associated with the condition or illness, and able to participate in an informed decision-making process regarding the medical care. Capacity indicates an ability to make choices that reflect an understanding and appreciation of the nature of the consequences of one's actions. Any issues or questions regarding a person's capacity must be resolved by the attending physician or practitioner. A hospital social worker can be consulted to provide assessment and education to caregivers as needed. So, how do we actually show capacity? Having or not having capacity is basically what the courts are looking for. There's kind of three parts: the ability to understand the information, the ability to think about your own values and your own wants and what kind of treatment or medical care is important to you, and the ability to then express those wishes. So say, for instance, someone has appendicitis. The surgeon told the person that surgery is needed. If it's not done, the appendix will burst and cause more infections and problems. They're told if they don't do the surgery, if the appendix bursts, the surgeon will have to still go in and clean out the infection. They're also told that people can live without their appendix and there's no downside to not having one. Was the person then able to understand all of that? Were they able to weigh the risks and benefits? Were they able to then express their wishes in some manner as to what decision they would like to make? So again, just another graphic. Can they understand the information to help make that decision? Can they retain that information? Can they weigh up that information? And can they communicate that decision to others? So again, this is not only persons with disabilities, but this is also in everyday life. We used it especially as our family members get older. My grandfather, on the one hand, was sharp as a tack, well into his 90s, could make his own decisions, didn't need any help. He knew what he wanted and what was important to him. Whereas my grandmother, as she got older and got dementia, she could tell you what she thought you wanted to hear. She could tell you what she thought she wanted, but when you went back and tried to ask her again, she didn't remember that you even had the conversation. So that was a case where a supported decision-making was good on the one hand, whereas a power of attorney was needed on the other. So questions that we might ask to determine capacity. We might ask the person, what is your understanding of the condition? What are the options for your situation? What is your understanding of the benefits and risks of treatment and the odds that it might work for you? What kind of risks are there? What kind of side effects may be the result? And what is your understanding of what will happen if nothing is done? We at Children's Mercy try to start including kids in these decisions early and helping them understand their medical condition. If they're diabetes, if they're a diabetic, we start day one with diagnosis, with helping them understand the condition, understand their diet, understand their medications, and grow on that as they grow with their ability to understand and educate, and we want that to be always the case. Questions to determine their ability to communicate would be that if they've been given a lot of information, have you decided what medical option is best for you? And we have discussed several choices. What do you want? Whether that person is able to communicate via a teledevice, whether they are able to tell mom and dad in a language that they understand, or physical signs, or what be it, if they are able to make that decision and communicate. So guardianships are established by the court, appointing someone to make decisions for someone else. There may be guardianships established for minors, which end at 18. We have a lot of those for children that say parents are unfortunately deceased, are unable to take care of them. They have perhaps gone into the foster system and been appointed a guardian as a family member or friend that is able to provide care for them. But the judge orders that, and they are then tasked with making those decisions, signing any consents, and being the legal representative for that child. Guardians used to be able to hand over a power of attorney to another entity. So if the guardian, say, was going on vacation and was leaving the child with an aunt and uncle, they could fill out a power of attorney. That is no longer the case. So now it's back to guardianships have to make all of the decisions. For an adult guardian, the doctor must be willing to provide the documentation that we talked about, like to determine capacity. So where do you file guardianship? Example, I need to obtain guardianship of my son who does not have the capacity to make his own decisions. He is living in a group home in Kansas City, but I live in Topeka. Help. Well, it's unusual that he would live in a group home in Kansas City, but be from Topeka. But that could happen. The rule of thumb is to file for guardianship in the state and county where they are actually living. So in this example, the proposed guardian would file in Jackson County, Missouri. For guardianships in Kansas, it does not require a separate conservative if the ward's income and assets are under $10,000 a year. So again, unless there is a large trust fund or insurance benefit, those kind of things. The petitioner must pay for a guardian ad litem, which is an attorney specifically for the ward. The going rate is about $1,500, is what I understand from our Kansas Legal Services team. If the family qualifies for financial assistance, we do have a medical legal partnership with the Kansas Legal Services team that we can assist you with, that we can see if they are able to help. The process is relatively quick once the paperwork is filed, but we do want to get that started soon, ideally right before they turn 18 so that we can get it processed and have it in place. Whereas in Missouri, the process is a little bit different. The person pays a fee with the county. It's usually around $150 or $200. The guardian ad litem is appointed by the state, but there is no charge to the family. And the weight varies by county. The attorney should be able to tell you what the estimated weight is. Missouri does have a limited guardian option, but it can be hard to obtain. So it could be that you just get guardianship over medical, legal, again, conservatorship. They do require a guardian and a conservator. Sometimes, if, again, there's not a large estate, it can be the same person. But if they're not married, there are a few different situations. The court will appoint an attorney, which is paid for by the state, so there's a small fee, again, about $200 for the filing fee in the county. The medical legal partnership says that the current wait in Missouri is about 12 months, and they are able to provide some financial assistance to families. Missouri now has a background check requirement for guardians if they are not parents, siblings, or offspring of the proposed ward. So if you are the pastor and you decide that you would like to take on and help this individual and feel like you are the best guardian for them, you will have to go through a background check just so that the court can be reassured that there's not anything worrisome there. So the Children's Mercy Legal Guardian Policy says, the person professing to be the legal guardian of a minor patient or incapacitated adult must present a copy of the court order naming that person as the guardian or legal custodian of the patient, and this documentation should be reviewed to ensure that it is valid for the time period in which care will be provided and allows the individual to consent to medical care or treatment under consideration or confers custody control to the guardians. A copy of the court documentation must be placed in the medical record of the patient for whom the individual is providing consent. Guardianships or custodianships can be terminated by a court, at which time the individual is no longer the guardian or custodian of the individual. Social worker may consult to be obtained. A social work consult may be obtained to assist with the process. So that means they call us and they say, well, Grandma and Grandpa are here with the kid, but they say that they have guardianship, but they don't have any paperwork. Okay, well, I need that paperwork before they can go to surgery. So is there somebody at the home that can get a copy and send it to us? Can they take a picture on their phone, email it to you so that I can get it in the record? Social worker has to then review that, make sure that we have everything legally correct in order to proceed with consent. A lot of times we get some pushback on that. You know, the child's been living with me for the last 3 years, mom's not available. Our mom or dad unfortunately died and we haven't been able to get guardianship. There's times that we do have to go through family services to work those things out. There's times when we can get information from the court to get permission to do those things. We're never going to deny a surgical procedure or emergent care to anyone. We can do emergent procedures, but anything that is optional or not life-threatening, we do have to get consent for, and that's just a legal requirement, and we have to be that way for everybody so we don't get shut down, so we can serve everybody. So this is the kind of document that you would be looking at. One parent and guardian conservator document, basically saying on April, you have to excuse me, my printing up here is small, so I can't read it. You can probably read it better there than I can. But then signed by the court, filed, we have to have the date and stamp and all of that to make it official. Another with co-guardians and co-conservators. A lot of times parents will get co-guardianship so that mom doesn't always have to be there at the doctor's appointment to make medical decisions. Dad can also serve. We also see them where, say, a parent and a sibling are assigned as co-guardians. So if and when something happens to the parent, the sibling can then take guardianship and not have to go back to court. Another example of that is a standby guardian, where if the assigned guardian becomes incapacitated, again, if the parent dies and the guardianship then goes to the standby guardian, or if they're, again, out of the country on a cruise in Europe and sister is there and something happens, she can sign. So basically, guardianship is used when there is a concern about the patient's capacity to make decisions on their own. It is a legal document through the court with an individual appointed to make decisions for the incapacitated person. It is difficult to change, as Jane said. You have to go before the court, and it's more restrictive and costly to the family. Supported decision making, even with an SDM in place, the adult must have capacity to sign legal documents. Now that could be an X, that could be a verbal consent. There's lots of ways that we can do that. They don't actually have to be able to sign a signature. The SDM is, again, a legally binding document. We do want to have those on file so that we can have record of who we can talk to, who's involved in the decision making. The person identifies people in their life who can assist them with deciding about care. And again, it's less restrictive and much less costly. In our system, we use the term personal representative. Every time I go to the doctor, they ask if there's someone that they can discuss my medical care with, if there's someone that they can call in case of emergency. You know, I have to sign the HIPAA consent saying, yes, you can call so-and-so and tell them that I need medical care. We call that in our system the personal representative, and that is who would be listed on your SDM agreement. So those people that you have said can assist you, we will be able to talk to. We won't be able to let them make decisions or sign consent, because that is still up to the individual. So if they're an adult or emancipated minor, generally there is no personal representative unless the court has appointed a legal guardian. So in those cases, we like to ask for a durable power of attorney, which Jane mentioned briefly. A durable power of attorney is a good idea for everyone. It's something that we talk with all of our adult patients about. Had a discussion last night. A patient was going into surgery, 20-year-old that has been served here for several years. But going into surgery, we like to have something on file saying that we can, A, talk with their parent, and B, if something should happen in the course of surgery, the parent can then make decisions. This became even more important during COVID, when a lot of us here realized that we, as even hospital staff, needed DPOAs because we just didn't know what was going on with COVID. And if we were to end up in the ICU ourselves, we wanted to have the ability for our family members to make decisions for us, and we can outline what those decisions might be. So again, Jane showed us a couple of these agreements. Let's see if I can make it come up here. Maybe not. There's one. This one was a simple one that just lists the name and address, the things that they need help with, just again, the check boxes. These do not have to be notarized, but do need to list the persons that they are approved, what they're approved to provide support with. Say you don't want your sister making any financial decisions for you. She's not good with money. She'll, run up your credit card bills. She may not be checkmarked on the finances there. So, again, and then the different people. My supporters will act jointly or successively, and I understand that I can choose this agreement at any time and any time frame. It is good until they make a decision otherwise. This one, I think, is the same as the one Jane had. It's a little more descriptive. There we go. The supported decision-making model goes through, again, the supporters and what they can and can't do. Financial decision-making, the individual realms that they might be able to help with. So those are both available online. And the durable power of attorney, we at the hospital use the Center for Practical Bioethics for our durable power of attorney forms that we give out. I do have a few copies here if anybody's interested that I'll leave at the registration table. Again, durable power of attorney is appointing someone to make decisions in the event that you become incapacitated. It is a notarized document. If you need a notary, we generally have one here at the hospital, except maybe sometimes overnight, but generally during business hours, there is one here that is happy to notarize for you. Then there's also the option of a healthcare treatment directive that you can say what you do and don't want. I don't want to be on a ventilator. I don't want to be on a feeding tube. If I get to the point that I can't make decisions or communicate, I want you to, end life-saving measures. You can outline that so that your family doesn't have any questions and knows what your wishes are. So that's also available. And I think we are right about time, but we can probably take a few questions if anybody has any. Both of our emails, if you have any questions. There's always a social worker here at Children's Mercy 24/7. I'm just coming off a night shift. If there's anything that you guys need or have questions about, you can always call. You can get us through the operator. You can ask your nurse to talk with us. Each clinic has a social worker available. So we want you all to feel free to ask us for support and whatever we might be able to help with. If we don't have answers, we'll try to get them for you. Any questions? I know I kind of ran through that pretty quick. Yes?
So if you are co-guardians, do people have to sign?
No.
Like if I go to Social Security to do something for that person, he doesn't have to as well sign?
No, not if it's appointed as a co-guardianship. Okay. All right. Well, I think, are we up for a break then?
Yeah, I just didn't know.
Okay. Thank you all.